And welcome to the next session in this. This is week 6 of the content. A lot of the stuff that we do today is actually going to be covered in more detail in the seminar session because there's some stuff that needs to get through there. But hopefully you'll be able to get a good grounding on it as we go. And a lot of this stuff shouldn't be that new to you. You will have come across it before, or you should have come across it before, just maybe not quite in the same context or in the detail, so you should still be able to apply it from other things that you already know. So what we're going to be looking at today is managing a retail business, and we're going to look at 3 different aspects of that: the organisational structure, the financial control, and then the operational dimensions of it. So when planning a retail organisation, what we'll always try and do is bring together the needs of 3 different elements within it. Importantly, and most importantly, the target market, the customer needs, need to be the primary element of it in any planning, because if you're not customer focused, you're not going to do very well, unless you're very lucky. You need to represent the employee needs, because unless you have a good, strong workforce, you can't go about meeting the needs of the customers either. But there also obviously needs to be some management needs in terms of profitability and accountability that need to be brought to bear. And with all these in mind, we also need to consider the generic value chain ideals that we've looked at in terms of where the different elements of an organisation combine and where they combine to specifically give you a margin, a profit margin. So just thinking about dividing the tasks amongst the channel members and customers. This is something that we looked at probably week 1 or 2, where we said that every part of the retail organisation, every kind of retail organisation, every link in the supply chain, every business in the supply chain has to think about their own operations and their own accountability. And that's what this just reminds you of, to remember that there is a value delivery system within that. So when you're designing such systems, you need to bear all of these in mind. So let's have a think about actually how an organisation might be structured, and I'm talking about you're right down to number of managers, that type of thing. So I've got some organisation charts here for you: functional, product, geographic, and combination organisation charts, and hopefully these will make sense. Some of them are a little bit blurred because I've had to import them on a low-res thing, so I'll just have to apologise for that, but hopefully you'll get it right. So if you think about functional organisation structure, I'll read them out because they're not that clear. So general manager is up here. Then you'd have maybe a director of finance, director of human resources, and then these are research and development, operations, and product marketing. What this enables you to do is that if your product, if your company has specific product needs within it, they're not necessarily going to be best met by this, because the people who know most about the product in its first iteration, i.e. the research and development people, are only doing research and development processes. They don't necessarily talk to the operations team about how's the best way to utilise this product, how's the best way to go about selling it. Plus they don't talk to the marketing people about it, who are the people that need to know ultimately about what it does. And also it doesn't allow for very good feedback between the marketing team, who essentially are the contact with the customers and develop them, and also the product development team. So it's not necessarily a great product organisational chart if you're looking for actually creating and manufacturing products. But what it does do is, if you have an existing set of products that are well established, you can implement this relatively straightforwardly. Um, Thinking about it from a more product-based one, this is where you'd typically have um, a general manager, president, whatever you want to call it at the top, and then there would be heads for different sections within it, and each of those sections would have marketing, sales, purchasing, and inventory within it, and then there would usually be a human resources and a finance one on top of it as well, so that every single product has its dedicated sales, research, development, purchasing, inventory, operations staff. This is great if you've got complicated products that need to have specialist information, because it's a team that's working together on every single product, on one particular product or category of product. So you can really get specialised within it. So if we think about both of these types of chart, and then we look at maybe what we do for geographic, well, essentially what you might want to do is replicate this and have a kind of regional manager and a general manager for each of these. But realistically, that's not viable for a shop. So we keep going back to this product one. So we'd have a regional head of jewellery, for example, and that's how we'd like to bring into the geographic ones. And that shows how you can combine these different things. The Mazor plan looks at really for department stores, and it's a way of separating out things really into 4 straightforward elements: merchandising, communications, store management, and financial accounting. So financial accounting is very much a kind of high-level thing which happens across a whole range of different things. Store management would typically be looking after all the concessions that were in the store, if it's a department store, and it would be looking after the financial contracts and the contracts with the different brands that was in it. The communications and the merchandising teams are obviously much more customer focused, and the merchandising team in particular need to have a very good idea in terms of what's happening on trend at the moment, in terms of the look and feel of the store inside, but also they need to work together with the communications team to show that those are reflected in the actual information that's going out there about the store in itself, and also the types of communications that matters. Now, bear in mind that if you've got a structure like this, what happens if you lose a member of staff? You need to have some degree of expertise in their field to cover in the short term before you can recruit a new person. If you have a functional organisational chart, this is less of an issue because you have a team of marketeers that already have specialists in a range of different things across your organisations. But if you're working in much more of a product organisational chart, then you can run into a few difficulties, or what you need to be able to do is get people to adapt quickly and to recruit people quickly as well. So thinking about staff, just want to touch on human resources for a while, and there's a video to watch on this as well which explains it far better than I do. Employee turnover is one of the things which affects businesses much more than you might imagine. Apart from the cost of salaries, there are several different other costs which we call on-costs in hiring somebody, and that includes the cost of recruitment, which can be expensive, like severance pay. There are all sorts of the invested training costs within that as well. It's an expensive business keeping up, so you want to recruit well, and you want to recruit people who will stay with your organisation for a decent length of time. So it's a good thing to look at some HR issues whilst we're here, and just thinking about particularly some of the kind of common things that come up in HR, particularly with regards to retail. Retail is obviously a very woman-dominated business. However, that is fair to say, from kind of low management down, but not senior management. So that's one of the HR issues in terms of how do you get more women across the board into it, and for the same matter, how do you get minorities across it? So across the board as well. Legislation in HR, well, then coming up in June we have a referendum, which I don't know if you've heard about it, which I'm not going to discuss in too much length, all other than to say there are lots of very good things that have happened in terms of the European Working Time Directive in regulating the number of hours that people can work, and in terms of protecting employees' rights that have come out of European legislation that is going to be up in the air should we leave the EU. So the legislation is always changing as well. There's a traditional issue with retailing, recruiting retailing personnel, and that is it is a specific skill. Selling in itself is a skill. Recruiting good people, good, well-qualified, intelligent people into retailing is difficult because it's not necessarily the best paid jobs in the world. There are some fantastic graduate recruitment schemes. Marks and Spencer's has an amazing graduate recruitment scheme. But that aside, there are few well-paid jobs for graduates, for example, straight off the bat. So you get a range of different people applying. So the quality of the people applying for jobs is always a bit of a problem. And again, if you're employing kind of part-time staff or students, for example, and we've already talked about the costs of replacing existing staff, it becomes a problem. So this next section, I'm going to look at a lot more in the session because, you'll see why. So just thinking about profit, asset management and key ratios. So how are we going to look at this within the context of managing a retail organisation? Very simply, profit and loss. I think we're all familiar with this concept, but just to think about it in terms of your net sales, how much you've actually sold stuff for, what was the cost of those things that you sold, then that gives you a gross profit. From that, you need to take out your operating expenses, which might be utility bills, rent, staffing is the main part of those operating costs usually. Other costs would be, typically promotion, publicity, miscellaneous kind of taxes and not taxes, but costs associated with legislative things, bodies, might be the subscription to the local chamber of commerce, that type of thing. So you have your costs, and then you have your profit before tax. Then the government tells you how much they want of that, and that leaves you with your net profit. So from what you're looking at is for net sales of 330,000 in this case, you're left with a net profit of £20,000. It's amazing where the money goes, isn't it? So in terms of balance sheet, this is a different example from it. Just thinking about how you, I'm sure you've done balance sheets before. If you haven't, I will look at them in a lot more detail for you. What we have here is you list all your assets, you list all your liabilities, and basically everything should balance at the end of it. That's what a balance sheet is, and that's what a balance sheet does. So it gives you a good snapshot of where the organisation is and what the total worth of the organisation is as well. And with these two, you have different elements which you can draw out to give you some key ratios, of which the most important and the most kind of headline-grabbing one certainly is net worth, which doesn't take into account profit, it doesn't take into account loss, other than to say what's happened in the balance sheet. And that is purely looking at is the will be your assets minus your liabilities. So in this case, it's £172,000 from here. There are several other ones, and I will go through all of these at the sessions. Ones to just kind of bring out in your head return on net worth, net profit margin time asset turn on time financial leverage is a very important leverage, as that usually is how you would go about deciding on what dividend you were going to pay out. A dividend being a payment to a shareholder based on the performance of the business. So we'll have a look at all of these different ratios within it. So enough of the maths for now. We will come back to that. There's another YouTube video to watch about the joys of being a store manager as well. Whilst we're in financial controlling, we'll just have a think about budgeting, and budgeting being very much a simple thing in terms of deciding who's going to set budgets and what different elements they're going to set, looking at goals and performance standards within those, and taking right through to actual expenditure, the monitoring of results and the adjustment. It's a very specific skill to have, and again, when we look at the ratios, I'll go through in the session a lot more about these bits and pieces. What you need to be able to do from all of these financial elements to the business is you need to be able to give a good example of your capital expenditure, your operating expenditure, the opportunity costs. I've talked about those a lot in terms of what it costs the customer to actually buy a product, as in not just the cost but the time of getting it, etc. The exactly same things apply in business as well, in terms of procurement can take a long time, but also productivity as well, to ensure that you are being as productive as you can be for the number of hours and the amount of money that you're putting into the organisation. So as a store manager or somebody who's going to be running a store, what you need to be able to do is have a good idea in terms of the exact, the scale of these different expenditures and costs on a certainly on a monthly basis, if not weekly, and you need to be able to do what you can be to increase the opportunity, to increase the productivity, and to reduce the operational and the capital expenditure. In terms of looking at personnel and making those work better, particularly in regards of profitability, what we'll be looking at is the hiring process, how long that takes. Is it worth you having 3 days of interviews to recruit one person, for example? Or is it better to do in a kind of regional job selection day? If you have a large chain of stores, could you do it all in a couple of days in one place and have 20 new people coming from one selection process? What we need to be able to do is also make sure that we take into account every different element of a member of staff. If they've been there for a long time, for example, what kind of rewards are there, as they have no doubtedly contributed significantly to the business, but also how would you go about replacing them if they leave, and managing the transitions within that. And also there's simple things of transition to self-service checkouts and things like that, which have an impact on personnel within an organisation. In terms of thinking about other factors in it, you have a range of different bits and pieces which could crop up. We haven't talked about these, but I will go through some of them in the session again. Most, importantly from this, energy management. I've mentioned about reducing the organisational costs and the capital costs. If you can get your energy management right, you can save a lot of money on bills alone, simply as that. Renovations, having a rolling programme of upkeep stores within it. Store security, making sure that people don't help themselves to your stock. And that can be either customers or staff themselves sometimes. And ultimately, crisis management, what do we do when it all goes wrong? When our store is flooded and we therefore have no customers coming into our store, we're not selling any stock, we have a load of stock that's perishing, what do we do then? So what we've looked at today, organisational structures, human resources, some elements on that, some of the elements of financial control, looked at how factors to consider when thinking about budgeting and resource allocation, looking at people and also some other factors. There's a little bit of further reading to do today. And for the seminar session, what I'd like you to look at is consider an organisational chart for different types of retailers. And also, what are the key considerations you would want to examine in most detail? So, from these different elements, what are the most important within that? So, I shall see you on Tuesday evening.